I left quietly after discovering my wife's affair. A year later, she found me, seeking forgiveness and a second chance. After hearing of my wife's adultery, I moved to the hills. I'm not sure why I'm writing this, but perhaps it will be helpful to someone now that the incident is over and I've moved on. After 3.5 years of marriage, I learned of my wife's affair in February 2018. I worked a contract job that occasionally required a lot of travel but also permitted me to work from home when I was available. I had been the director of a small technical sales company for almost 3 years, a job I loved because it allowed me to challenge myself while also providing the comfort of stability. My wife, Clara, held a very lucrative position at a law firm. She was intelligent, driven, and beautiful, qualities that had originally drawn me to her. Our lives seemed perfect to everyone around us. Our friends envied our success, and our families respected us for how well we had built our lives together. But behind closed doors, things weren't as perfect as they seemed. At first, things had been wonderful. Our wedding, only 3 years ago, felt like the start of something extraordinary. I remember the day vividly. The sun was shining, Clara's laughter filled the air, and everything felt like it was falling into place. We were partners, best friends, and lovers. I was proud of her success at work, and she supported me with mine. Our weekends were filled with hikes, quiet dinners, and adventures that never seemed to stop. We had always been that couple that everyone else admired, the couple that seemed unbreakable. However, as time passed, something began to shift. I couldn't pinpoint when exactly, but the spark between us seemed to dim. I was away for business often, working long hours in foreign cities, closing deals, attending meetings, and spending nights in sterile hotel rooms. In some ways, it was a dream job, fast-paced, rewarding, and full of excitement. But it wasn't without its sacrifices. And those sacrifices began to show in our relationship. Clara was still successful in her own right, and we had made a comfortable life. But I found myself noticing the small signs, the things I thought were just part of normal life. There was the occasional late night at the office, the quiet dinners with only the hum of the television to fill the silence, and the brief exchanges when I would return home, where she seemed distant, almost preoccupied. I brushed it off at first. She was busy, I was busy. We were both building our careers after all. I told myself it was just a phase. After all, we were still making time for each other when we could. But in hindsight, I realize now I was fooling myself. It wasn't a phase. It was the beginning of something that would destroy everything we had built. Clara was becoming increasingly elusive. I would call her during my trips, and sometimes she wouldn't pick up, other times she seemed distracted. When I came home, I'd find her in a strange mood, withdrawn and curt. Conversations became more like passing exchanges, mechanical, polite, but devoid of the warmth and intimacy we once shared. I should have known something was wrong. The turning point came when I was returning from a trip to San Francisco in early February. It had been an intense few days of back-to-back meetings, late nights with clients, and too many hotel room meals. I was exhausted, both physically and emotionally, and all I wanted was to come home to Clara and have a quiet evening together. But when I walked through the door, the house felt different, empty almost. Clara wasn't home, and the silence hung heavy in the air. I checked my phone for a message, but there was nothing. Just the same note she always left when she was working late. At the office. Won't be home for dinner. Don't wait up. But something felt off. I couldn't shake the unease in my chest. I went upstairs to our bedroom to unpack, but as I opened the drawer to put away my clothes, something caught my eye. It was a small piece of paper, sticking out from under a stack of clothes. At first, I thought it was just another forgotten receipt or note, but as I pulled it out, I froze. It was a receipt for a hotel room, dated the previous weekend. I glanced at it, my heart beating faster with every second. Clara had been in a hotel that weekend, but I had been out of town for business. So, who had she been with? A sickening feeling settled in my stomach as I realized I was holding the key to something I had been avoiding. My heart pounded in my chest as I opened her phone, searching for any trace of what I had suspected but didn't want to believe. As I scrolled through the messages, I found them, the texts, the photos, the plans. Clara had been having an affair. And it wasn't just a brief fling. It was an ongoing, secret relationship with someone from her office. The flood of emotions that hit me in that moment was overwhelming. Anger, disbelief, and a profound sadness that I hadn't felt before. How could she do this? How could she betray everything we had built together? I stumbled back, clutching the phone, feeling as though the ground had shifted beneath me. My wife, the woman I had loved for years, had been living a lie, and I hadn't seen it. I couldn't think. I couldn't breathe. The pain was suffocating. That night, when Clara returned home, I didn't confront her immediately. I needed time to process what I had just discovered. But as soon as she walked through the door, her smile faded when she saw the expression on my face. She knew something was wrong. And in that moment, I realized she knew that I knew. I didn't say a word. I just handed her the phone. She looked at the messages, her face paling as she scanned through the texts. Her hands trembled as she looked up at me, a mix of guilt and fear in her eyes. "It's not what you think," she said weakly, her voice breaking. I made a mistake. I never wanted to hurt you." The words felt hollow. The damage had already been done. I couldn't listen to her apologies, couldn't bear to hear her explanation. The truth was right in front of me, and nothing she could say would change it. I left that night, packed a small bag, got in my car, and drove. I didn't know where I was going, only that I needed to get away from her, from everything. The silence of the house was suffocating, and the weight of her betrayal pressed down on me. I ended up in the hills, a place I had visited many times in the past to clear my head. The isolation was what I needed, the quiet, the space to think, to breathe. The hills were always a sanctuary for me. Whenever life became too overwhelming, I would retreat to the small cabin I had rented years ago, far away from the noise, the chaos, and most importantly, far away from Clara. I never planned on staying long, just enough time to get my thoughts in order, but as the days turned into weeks, I realized I couldn't go back. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I needed space to process everything, to deal with the overwhelming emotions that had consumed me since the discovery of her affair. I spent my days walking through the forests, lost in thought, the sounds of nature offering the only comfort in a time when everything I had known felt like it was falling apart. Every evening, I sat by the fire and thought about what had happened. How had things gotten this far? How had I missed the signs? I thought about our early days together. The laughter, the dreams we shared, the love we had built. It felt like another lifetime. The betrayal seemed so far removed from the relationship we once had, and yet it was the cold reality I had to face. I replayed the night of the confrontation over and over in my mind. Clara's eyes, filled with fear and guilt, haunted me. But I also remembered something else, the look of resignation on her face when she admitted what she had done. It was as if, deep down, she knew the damage was irreparable. Her actions had severed the bond between us in a way that words could never fix. The first few days in the cabin were quiet, almost peaceful. But slowly, the pain began to settle in. I would wake up with a pit in my stomach, that hollow feeling in my chest, and the knowledge that my life had been irrevocably changed. The anger had subsided, replaced by a deep sadness and a longing for the life I thought I had. The future I had envisioned for us seemed like a cruel joke now. I was left to face the fact that I was alone, not just physically but emotionally, too. I don't know why I stayed at the cabin for as long as I did. Perhaps it was because I needed to heal, or perhaps because I needed the distance to clear my mind. But every so often, I found myself thinking of Clara. I remembered her laughter, her smile, the way she would curl up beside me at night. I missed those moments, even if I knew they could never be reclaimed. It was as if I was mourning the loss of the person I thought she was, the person I had loved with all my heart. Eventually, time began to dull the edges of the pain. I started to focus on myself, on what I needed to do to move forward. I began running again, something I hadn't done in years. The miles seemed to ease the tension in my body, and for brief moments, I could forget everything that had happened. I read books, wrote in my journal, and spent more time outside, enjoying the simplicity of life. The cabin was quiet, peaceful, everything I needed to regain a sense of control. And then one day, after a month of solitude, I got the call. It was Clara. Her voice was hesitant, unsure. She apologized again, just as she had on the night of our confrontation. But this time it was different. Her voice held a vulnerability I hadn't heard before, as if she had finally come to terms with what she had done. She told me that she missed me, that she had spent every day since our separation trying to figure out what had gone wrong. She admitted that the affair had been a mistake, a moment of weakness, but that she regretted it deeply. "I know I hurt you," she said, her voice trembling. "But I love you. I want to make this right. Please, I need a chance to show you that I can be the woman you thought I was. I can't lose you." I listened in silence. I hadn't expected this, didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to hang up, to continue my life without her, to move on. But another part of me, a part one couldn't ignore, still cared. Still loved her. "I need time, Clara," I finally said, my voice thick with emotion. "I need time to think." We spoke for a few more minutes, and then I ended the call. I didn't know what to think. I wasn't ready to forgive her. I wasn't sure if I ever would be. But I also didn't know if I could just walk away from everything we had. Over the next few weeks, I tried to push her out of my mind. I focused on my work, on rebuilding the life I had started to put together again. But Clara's words echoed in my head. She loved me. She wanted a second chance. And I couldn't deny that part of me still wanted to believe her, to believe that we could start over, that she could prove herself worthy of my trust once again. But the question lingered in my mind. Could I ever trust her again? Could I truly forgive her for what she had done? The affair was not just a betrayal. It was a violation of everything I had believed in. How could I move forward knowing that the woman I loved had been with someone else, someone I didn't even know? I spent a long time in conflict. My head told me to walk away, to let go, and never look back. But my heart still felt connected to her. It still missed her. And then one day, she showed up at the cabin. I wasn't expecting her. It had been weeks since our last conversation, and I had convinced myself that she would never come back. But there she was, standing on the doorstep, looking small and vulnerable. Her hair was pulled back into a loose ponytail, and she wore a simple coat, the same one she had worn during the early days of our relationship. Her eyes were red from crying, and her cheeks were pale. "I had to see you," she said softly. "I couldn't stay away. Please, let me explain everything. Please, let me show you how sorry I am." I stood there, frozen, not knowing what to do. Part of me wanted to shut the door, to end this once and for all. But another part of me, one I couldn't ignore, wanted to hear her out. Maybe it was foolish. Maybe it was a mistake. But I let her in.